تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على ختم الأنبياء وإمام الأتقياء وسيد الأصفياء سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Maraqi al-Falah, Sharh Nur al-Idah, we're continuing to look at the chapter on the Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Maraqi al-Falah, Sharh Nur al-Idah, we are continuing to go through the chapter on imama, on leading prayer, and related to that then the rulings related to the following, iqtida. And some places divide it into imama and into iqtida. And if you're diagramming, good to look at what are the shurut sihhat al-imama and what are shurut sihhat al-iqtida, right? Because they're distinct. So we saw that from the conditions for valid following are, and there are many, but these are detailed in an extensive manner, right? They can be summarized. And one of the things that help is to read both summary presentations of things and detailed presentations. But the two are interrelated, right? Because it's one madhab, right? Well, there is khilaf, but that's also where be very selective what you read. Just because something is good, just because someone edited a good book. I was reading the editing of a treatise by Imam al-Tahtawi, and the editor, who seems like a good man from a good institution and good everything, but he decides to summarize the issue before, and it's totally random, methodologically deeply problematic, right? So good book, good topic, good guy, but the problem is he's not a specialist, really. Like, it's sort of largely self-taught, self-researched, and coming up with conclusions that are ultimately deeply problematic, right? That are deeply, deeply problematic. So what do you need to do? Be very selective in where you read, right? But it's very hard to just put in your mind that there are this number of 14 conditions. These can be summarized, right? And when you find a good summary, that's something good, then you consult about that. Okay, is this a good summary of the issue, right? And that requires hard work. But also knowing these details in detail is worth more than doing lots of reading, right? A lot of people like reading big books, whether it be easy big books or big or just big books for whatever reason, right? You know, who is the faqih? Al-faqih man atqana al-furu', right? Bifahm, right? The faqih is one who knows the legal details with understanding. So just be wary of unnecessary, distractedness in that sense as well. So the conditions were that, the follower must intend following, niyatul mutaba'a, and that it be at or before the tahrima. For the imam to have intended to lead the women with respect to women being able to pray behind him. And we looked, there's khilaf on this, we'll see it. But in the general case, you can assume it, right? In the general case, you can assume it. then we also saw that the Imam not be of a lesser state with respect to their prayer than the follower, right? So you need فَلَا يَصِحُّ فَرْضٌ خَلْفَ مُتَنَفِّلٍ. So it's not valid to pray fard behind someone praying nafil, nor to pray one fard when the Imam is praying another fard. In our madhab, it's not valid. These daqa'iq al-masail, one doesn't tell the ammi. Why? Because it's valid in other madhabs, right? And wal-ammi la madhab lah. If they had a madhab, they only have a madhab if they've actually studied it. So, and then we stopped at وَأَنْ لَا يَكُونَ مُقِيمًا لِمُسَافِرْ بَعْدَ الْوَقْتِ فِي رُبَاعِيَّةٍ. That one not be praying أن لا يكون مقيما, that the Imam not be resident لمسافر بعد الوقت في رباعية, right? That the Imam not be resident for a traveler after the time in a 4 rak'ah prayer. Why? لما قدمناه because of what we have mentioned before. What is, and this is one of the places where the Mashaykh mentioned, this is sort of the kind of area where there's a test that, did you actually study the Maraqi properly? What did he make taqdeem of? What is this referring to?
How many rakahs the Musafir has to pray if he misses his prayer?
No. لما قدمناه. What did he make taqdeem of? Okay. Yeah. So a proper preparation for class, my dear friends, would be that these are the things that you have prepared in advance, right? لما قدمناه. What did he do, right? And it's always important to remind what the Mashaykh would recommend, that if somebody, there's levels of preparation for class. The least is that at least read ahead, like read before you come and try to understand it. That's the least preparation, right? So you review what you've taken and you do a basic preparation. Better than that, right? Better than that is that you prepare deeply, right? So that you have anything that is unclear, you come ready with your questions. You look up these references, right? Where it says, لِمَا قَدَّمْنَاهُ, which what we have mentioned before. You try to decipher the text, either you find it out, or at the very least you say, okay, what is he referring to, right? So that if it's mentioned in class, you've clarified what was unclear to you, because if it was unclear to you, it'll be unclear to someone that it could be unclear to you later, or it'll be unclear to someone else you're trying to transmit this text to. And then there's a deep preparation, right? Which is, in a guided manner, you do the related readings, etc., right? You research key issues, you come with deep questions, right? So, لِمَا قَدَّمْنَاهُ, which is the previous shart, which is that the Imam not be of a lesser state than the follower, right? And how does that apply? Right? فيكون اقتداء مفترض بمتنفل في حق القاعدة, right? Because the outside of the time, the follower, the traveler who's following, how many rakahs are they supposed is fard on them themselves? 2. The resident imam, there's 4 rak'ahs. The second, the qa'da al-ula, what is its ruling for the imam? It's wajib. What's the ruling of the qa'da itself? This first al-qa'da, that sitting after 2 rak'ahs. What is its ruling for the imam? It's wajib. For the follower, it is fard, because they're a traveler. Their fard is 2 rak'ahs. Right? And this is explained by Imam al-Tahtawi. You should be ready and prepared for that. So, given that that is the case, then this will be iqtida'u muftarid bi mutanaffil. Right? And so there are constituent parts to this. One is the ruling itself. This is related in Zahir al-Riwayah. Right? Right? That's number 1. Right? Some of the awjuh, some of the angles of the ruling are given. Others are deduced. Right? Others are deduced. So, but this is the issue in summary, right? That, the traveler can pray behind the resident person within the time. Actually, when we'll see in Salat al-Musafir, it's not clear who is superior to lead. Should the traveler lead, or should the follower lead? Or should the resident person lead? If all other considerations are equal. What does Imam Shurmbulali say? Yeah, qila kada wa qila kada, right? There's no clear tarjih on the issue. There are considerations that are secondary considerations, confusing people, this, that. So, فيكون اقتداء مفترض بمتنفل, lest it be of someone praying a fard, be following behind someone doing something nafil with respect to the first sitting, أو القراءة, or the recitation. Which recitation? Right? That if you joined late, if the follower joined in the second half of the prayer, right? What is the ruling of the recitation of the imam there? It's nafil. And that goes back to defining the nature of the follower, right? That the latecomer, and there's hadith that this is based on, but the latecomer has caught what they caught and they make up what they missed. Right? 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 So so what they caught was nafil. They're making up what they missed. But so again, the recitation of the imam is nafil. With respect to them, it would count as a fard. So that's a problem, right? ولا مسبوقا, right? Nor أن لا يكون مقيما لمسافر بعد الوقت في رباعية ولا مسبوقا, right? لشبهة اقتدائه, right? So can you pray behind a masbuq? No. Right? So this happens. You cannot take when لا يكون الإمام مسبوقا, right? Right? when لا يكون مقيما لمسافر ولا مسبوقا. What kind of what is ولا مسبوقا here? What's the i'rab of it? Yeah. Right? Right? ولا مسبوقا. Right? Nor can the ولا أن لا يكون الإمام مسبوقا. And the Imam cannot be مسبوق. Someone was a late comer, so they got up to finish, to do the 2 rak'ahs that they missed. A follower cannot pray behind someone who is masbuq. How would you know that? If you enter the masjid for Asr, by using your judgment. Where are they praying, for example, right? Okay. So in our madhab, the imam, you know, the latecomer cannot be made into an imam. If a Shafi'i tries to pray behind you, someone comes and they tap your shoulder, what should you do? Practically, you can just ignore them, but presumably they're either following another madhab or they don't know. So were you to raise your voice slightly, you know, there's no harm in it. But you don't have to intend being imam, because it's not a condition for them, for you to intend to lead them. وَأَنْ لَا يَفْصِلَ بَيْنَ الْإِمَامِ وَالْمَأْمُومِ صَفٌّ مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ لقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من كان بينه وبين الإمام نهر أو طريق أو صف من النساء فلا صلاة له. Right? Right? What takhrij do you have of this narration? Omar? Anyone?
My edition says he doesn't find this one, but he finds something similar in Ibn Shayba.
Ibn Abi Shayba.
No, okay, but here he says Ibn Shayba only. And then he says من قول عمر ما لفظه إذا كان بينه وبين الإمام طريق أو نهر أو حائط فليس معه.
Okay. Does he reference Kitab al-Athar?
No.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have here أخرجه ابن أبي شيبة في مصنفه وأبو يوسف في كتاب الآثار.
Right? Now you cannot trust any of these takhrijis. One, the author's name, the great Imam's name is Ibn Abi Shayba, right? Secondly, frequently something, if it's related by Ibn Abi Shayba only, it's quite likely to be from the, not always, but it's quite likely to be from an athar from the Sahaba, right? An athar from the Sahaba. My copy says Al-Imam Yaqub. Who is Yaqub? Abu Yusuf. What's his full name? Yeah, so he's known as Abu Yusuf, but he has a name, right? It's Yaqub, but what is the full name? It's important to know these things, right? But again, you cannot, it is number one, unreliable, number two, untrue. If you were to reference from your footnote, like if you quoted this, if you memorized it and just reference it to Abu Yusuf related it, you don't know what Abu Yusuf related, because editors, doesn't matter how big a title they have to be assumed to be unreliable. And you have to be able to check these things. Now, that's not a priority for us right now, right? So I don't want to go into it. Right? وعليه الفتوى, right? وأن لا يفصل بين الإمام والمأموم صف من النساء, because then you are disconnected from what is jama'ah with respect to you. Right? وعليه الفتوى. Right? Sorry, and then he says, فإن كنا ثلاثا فسدت صلاة ثلاثة خلفهن. If there's three women, then the prayer of the three men immediately behind them would be invalid. من كل صف إلى آخر الصفوف. Because those people are the ones who are standing behind the women. وعليه الفتوى. وجاز اقتداء الباقي. But the following of the rest would be valid. جاز أي صحة. It's valid. You cannot choose to structure your صف like that, but it will be valid. وقيل الثلاث صف مانع من صحة الاقتداء لمن خلف صفهن جميعا. And it's said in a second opinion, it's more strict, that if there's three women, then everyone's prayer behind them is not valid. Right? Right? And there's details of this coming in the section on muhadha. وإن كانتا ثنتين, if there's two women, فسدت صلاة الثنتين خلفهما فقط. If there's two women, then the prayer of the two people behind them immediately would not be valid. Everyone else's prayer is valid. وإن كانت واحدة في الصف محاذية فسدت صلاة من حاذته عن يمينها ويسارها والصلاة آخر خلفها. If there's just one woman standing in the line, then the person standing immediate to her right and immediate to her left, their prayer is not valid, and the prayer of one person behind her. So you could diagram this. Ultimately because of the command of the Prophet ﷺ, of praying in this order, because يترتب عليه فساد. And more detail on muhadha. The exception they made to this is الجموع الكبيرة جدا التي لا تنضبط عادة. The very large congregations that are not possible to so for example, of course, if there's a gap, if there's a barrier between the men and women, there's leeway, but it gets tricky. For example, there's a masjid, right? The men ahead, the women behind, but then there's overflow in the masjid. And there's rows of men standing outside the masjid into the parking lot. So those men, where are they? They're behind the women. That would be excused. One, because there's a barrier between them, and number two, this is li'udhr. So the masail of muhadha in general, of being next to the women, but also behind them, there's the basic rulings, but then there are contextual circumstances, right? And those, there's fatawa related to, right? And then there's issue of ittihad al-makan. And this is, right? Right? The shart of صحة الاقتداء is ittihad al-makan حقيقة أو حكما. That you be in one place, حقيقة, actually or effectively. Right? So, ittihadul makan, if you're in the same place, it's very straightforward, right? You're both in the same hall, right? So what's considered one place? We're going to look at the details. But it's ittihadul makan haqiqatan aw hukman. And related to that is والقدرة على الاقتداء, and you have to be able to follow the imam, right? Directly or indirectly. Otherwise, how are you going to follow him? So you have to either hear the imam or see the imam, or see or hear the rows behind the imam. Otherwise, how are you following the imam? So ittihad al-makan, the whole masjid is considered one place. The whole masjid is considered one place. But in other than the masjid, each defined place is considered, so each room, for example, is considered one place. Hukman is that you're adjacent to the place without any gap that yamna al-ittisal urfan, that without a gap that customarily prevents, it's customarily considered to be a different place, right? That there's a big gap. And that can be tricky. But some of the descriptions are of marji'uhu ila al-urf, that are you considered to be part of the jama'ah, right? Are you considered to be part of the jama'ah? This comes up with praying from the haram, right? So if you have a hotel that's just outside the haram, right? So the ittihad al-makan is your either muttasil bil imam, or of where the imam is praying, or where the rows reach. So for example, if there's a masjid, and then there's a field, and then there's a river, large river, could you follow the imam from the other side of the river? Could you? Validly, of course.
Only if a ship can pass through the river?
No, large river. How could you pray? So there's a masjid, and then there's a field, and then there's a river, and you're standing on the other side. Could you pray with them? They're praying in a jama'ah.
No.
Yeah, if there's a bridge over the river, but there's people praying on the bridge. So then there's ittisal, right? Because you're not in the same place, you're not in an adjacent place, but you are adjacent to where there's people praying. So you could. But then there's circumstances for fatwa. There are details, right? So what's mentioned here is the mu'tamad, but there are situations where, firstly, don't go around throwing fatwas, right? It came up, for example, in Amman, one of the masajid, they had, actually a wealthy Syrian businessman had built this masjid, but the way the masjid was set up and so on, they built a separate place for the women, and there was a bit of a gap between the two, right? But a large number of women would pray there, and there's reason that they kept, right? So technically it's wider than these descriptions. So those are called waqi'at. Something happens, right? Something happens. Those kinds of things never give fatwa on, or they never give fatwa, full stop. But never relate a general ruling to a specific case, especially when it has implications, either on an individual and particularly on others. Ask, right? Ask. Omar, just so اتحاد المكان حقيقة أو حكما, right? And the second is القدرة على متابعة الإمام, and the ability to follow the Imam, right? By hearing them or seeing them, or seeing or hearing someone behind the Imam. Okay. So how is اتحاد المكان defined? Right? وأن لا يفصل بين الإمام والمأموم نهر يمر فيه الزورق في الصحيح، والزورق نوع من السفن الصغار، ولا طريق تمر فيه العجلة. Right? That there not be between the Imam and the follower a river in which even small boats can go through. Right? Meaning a small river, so it'd be a stream rather than a big river. You're on the other side of the Nile. Right? ولا طريق تمر فيه العجلة, nor a path on which, what's the عجلة?
A cart?
Yeah, a cart, could be driven on. Meaning so a path, a path does not prevent, but a road does. You're on the other side of the road, that's a big gap. But وليس فيه صفوف متصلة. If والحال أنه ليس فيه صفوف متصلة, and it's such that the rows are not connected. So there aren't those who are on the river, right? Like on a bridge over the river, for example. والمانع في الصلاة فاصل يسع الصفين على المفتى. And the mani', the preventative with respect to the validity of the prayer, is that there be a barrier that is wide enough for 2 rows of people praying. What? Right? What does Imdad al-Fattah say? Okay. So والمانع في الصلاة, right? And what prevents prayer outside of the mosque is a gap that fits 2 rows. على المفتى به, according to the fatwa position. Right? والمانع, which copy has في الفلاح? Omar.
My copy has Faraz.
Yeah, that would appear to be في الفلاح. Anyone else? See, Zain, which edition do you have?
I have the Darul Fiha Maktaba Darul Taqal.
Darul what?
مكتبة دار الحقاق.
Who's the editor?
Shaykh Shanna.
Okay. Okay. So it would appear to be the correct thing would clearly appear to be fil fala, right? In an open space. This is outside the masjid and not in an enclosed area, right? Like, because if it's a road, it has to be small. If it's on the other side of the river, this is the criteria, right? So this على المفتى به, because all of these there's a lot of aqwal. Basically, is this place considered to be either is the اتحاد المكان, or are you in a مكان يعد تابعا له, you're next to it, يعني بلا فاصل كبير, right? Now the whole masjid by default is considered one place, right? Right? But now the general principle is al-masjid يعتبر مكانا واحدا حكما. A masjid is considered one place. Some of the ulama said that except in the really big masjids. But they said that the reason in the really big masjid would be in the old days لاشتباه حال الإمام, that you would know what the imam is doing, right? But now there's an issue that arises, that what about Islamic centers, for example, which the whole place is not designated as a masjid, right? The men's musalla is designated as a masjid, and there's a response, right? Which is that and you can see in the footnote where it says قوله على المفتى به, that فناء المسجد, and there's two. Now the fina of the masjid refers to two things. Can refer to the courtyard or the area outside the masjid. That's considered tabi' urfan lil masjid, right? So the simple answer with respect to an Islamic center that the ulama mention is that with respect to the Islamic center, all of the Islamic center would be considered to be like you have a masjid. Legally, only the prayer area is part of the masjid, but the women are behind. But are they in the same building? Is it tabi' lil masjid? Yes. And this would be important because not just with respect to the women, with respect to the men. Let's say they're praying, let's say, a masjid that the men pray on the first floor. There's a gym on the ground floor. Right? So there's no ittisal. It's on a different floor. Right? And the sufuf aren't muttasila. Because nobody's praying on the landing or the stairs, because you have to keep the stairs clear. But is it considered, are you in the same place? Yes. So with respect to the masjid, it is considered one place, right? And then one floor difference is considered tabi', right? So for example, if there's a family gathering, right, one floor difference is considered tabi', hukman. Right? So the men are praying in the basement, the women are one floor above. That's considered tabi'. And they talk about the dhulla, right? Like the balcony, for example, right? Or the qabu, the basement. Of course, with respect to women praying immediately below or immediately above, the issue of muhadha comes. We'll touch upon that when we get to it. But the fasil yasa'u صفين, right? There are a number of other opinions. Right? So don't, like, often it happens, let's say there's a caravan of people traveling, right? And then they're praying in a parking lot, for example. So the men pray ahead and the women pray significantly behind. Safain is not a big gap. Saf is from where the feet are to where you would prostrate, and just a little more for comfort. So a gap bigger than that in the open, right? You're in the park, the women are significantly behind. It may seem more pious, but the caution is for them to be closer. And there, ittihadul makan, some people consider the urf. Are they considered in the same place? They're praying in the same field, for example, right? So there's some leeway here, but you have to make dabt of this mas'ala. One of the i'tibar is it's considered the same place, urfan. Because this is taqdeer of a meaning that is understood from the shara, but it doesn't have the miqdar is not mahdud min al-shari', right? ولا يفصل بينهما حائط ويشترط أن لا يفصل بينهما حائط كبير يشتبه معه العلم بانتقالات الإمام, and there not be a large wall between the Imam and the follower, by virtue of which there will be confusion regarding the movements of the Imam. فإن لم يشتبه العلم بانتقالات الإمام, if there is no confusion regarding the movements of the Imam, لسماع أو رؤية, because of hearing or seeing the Imam, or the people behind the Imam, the muballigh sound, or being able to see the rows behind. وَلَمْ يُمْكِنْ الْوُصُولِ إِلَيْهِ, and it's not possible to reach the Imam, because in the Shafi'i school, there has to be a direct route between the follower and the Imam, right? And we don't have, but in our madhab it's not. صح الاقتداء به, it is valid to pray behind him في الصحيح, according to the sound opinion. وهو اختيار شمس الأئمة الحلواني, and that's the choice of شمس الأئمة الحلواني. لما روي أن سيدنا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصلي في حجرة السيدة عائشة. It's related that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray in the room of Sayyidah Aisha رضي الله تعالى عنها, وَالنَّاسُ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ يُصَلُّونَ صَلَاتَهُ, and the people would be in the mosque praying behind him. It's related by Abu Dawood and others. وعلى هذا الاقتداء في المساكن المتصلة بالمسجد الحرام, and from this we can deduce the ruling of the houses that were connected to the Masjid al-Haram in the old days. وأبوابها من خارجه, and their doors are from the other side, right? They used to be right by the walls of the Masjid al-Haram. صحيح إن لم يشتبه حال الإمام, if the state, their prayer would have been valid as long as the state of the Imam were not confused. In Maidan, our kitchen, our house was, part of our house almost touched the masjid. The masjid was built at an angle and our house was built at a different angle. That's how things are built where there's chaos. So they're like, the wall of the kitchen was almost touching the wall. So there's a little opening, all unplanned, that all you could see from the opening was a little bit of the masjid wall, and a little bit of light. If you poked your hand through it, and I don't know why the opening was there, nobody was thinking, of course, very much, you could touch the masjid. So if you could hear you could pray from there. But being separate from the sufuf is makruh, of course. There's never validity. For men to be praying separately from the sufuf, etc., is makruh. بسماع أو رؤية, either if they're able to follow the imam by hearing or seeing. ولم يتخلل إلا الجدار, and the only barrier is the wall. كما ذكره شمس الأئمة, as شمس الأئمة أي السرخسي mentioned. في من صلى على سطح بيته المتصل للمسجد. If someone prays on the roof of their house, that is connected, then the house is connected to the masjid. أو في منزله بجنب المسجد, or in their house next to the masjid. وبينه وبين المسجد حائط مقتديا بإمام في المسجد. And all that separates you from the imam is a wall, and the imam's in the masjid. وهو يسمع التكبير, and you can hear the takbir من الإمام, from the imam. أو من المكبر, or you can hear the one repeating the takbir behind the imam. And like the mukabbir would be, now there's difference, that what is the legal sense of a loudspeaker, right? And again, you have to be careful of who you listen to, right? Some people say, look, the scholars debated for years about loudspeakers and their use. Yeah, but what did they debate about it, right? So don't take your deen or your notions of deen from unreliable people. Is this considered to be the voice of the imam itself, or is this considered to be like the mukabbir, like someone relating the voice of the imam, and it has different legal implications, right? That when can you follow it, etc. But also there's public considerations, right? That a natural voice only goes so far, right? And what about the elderly, the sick, the children, etc., right? In many parts of the Muslim world, there's been loudspeaker contests between different masajid, in the sense that everyone raising their voice, etc., just raising their loudspeaker level, right? And causing a lot of chaos, which is in some places they just gave one live adhan, like in Jordan, generally, except for some masajid that are private. They just give one live adhan that's broadcast everywhere. But because of a chaos, right? In some countries, if you're sitting down over a period of 15 minutes, you could possibly hear a dozen different adhans, and it's disruptive. You answered one, or you're praying now, and other adhans are going off, right? The basis, each adhan reaches its da'ira, its circle, right? So people make out all this thing, and it's not even factual. What did they say? إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا, right? Like people say, the Ottomans fell behind because of what? They didn't approve publishing of books, because they had systems in place for there was a method to the transcription of manuscripts, right? The proper editions, that there would be waqf in a madrasa or waqf in a masjid, right? Or the scholars would transmit them. There would be an attempt at caution with respect to transmission, right? Now suddenly this technology comes, and we're going to be publishing the mushaf without a process of training and verification. Said we have to wait till we can do that. So until you can transmit accurately, should you transmit? Of course not. This is the Quran, and took the longest to approve the publication of the Quran. Why? Because you have a trained scribe who's writing the Quran by hand, according to principles, approved, this, that, the other. There's people you don't even know who they are. They're not tested. Who are going to be printing the Quran using, the print technology at that time. It's a typeset Quran, and we cannot verify that. Of course, they won't approve of it. Likewise, the books of knowledge, and you see the disaster that we have right now, without proper processes and standards in place. So be aware of whom you listen to, right? It doesn't matter who they are. If you see people talking negatively about ulama or ilm or in general, just talk negatively of people. Man qala halaka an-nas fahuwa ahlakuhum. Whoever said the people are ruined is the most ruined of people. This has to go, al has to do for the jins, all people are ruined, but also specific categories of people. Right? Because it's simply not factual. Said, all butchers are cheats. That's a lie. How could all butchers be cheats? Right? And then why are you saying this? What are you suggesting? Like, let alone when you get closer to ilm. So be very careful. Okay. And here he mentions Shams al-A'imma, right? تجوز صلاته كذا في التجنيس والمزيد. And this is also in التجنيس والمزيد, which is by al-Marghinani. It's now published, right? It's been published for a while. And the Tajnis wal-Mazid is very important because التجنيس والمزيد, the tajnis is المسائل المتجانسة لظاهر الرواية. And the mazid are مسائل زائدة على مسائل ظاهر الرواية, gathered by a great Imam, al-Marghinani. He authored it after the Hidayah. It's also very significant. And unlike most of the books of Fatawa and Waqi'at from that period, he mentions the rulings with legal reasoning. It is also invaluable. But of course, an advanced book. Someone should have studied the madhab first. ويصح ابتداء الواقف على السطح بمن هو في البيت ولا يخفى عليه حاله. And it's valid for someone to stand on the roof to pray behind someone who's in the house, as long as they're able to follow them. But doing so without an excuse is makruh. So what happened? You took a ladder to climb on the roof, and then someone took the ladder away. So you're stuck on the roof. You can pray behind someone immediately below. Okay. And we'll stop here right now, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. We'll complete the section next week. And there's also the issue of what the there's a few important conditions, including that هل العبرة بصحة صلاة الإمام حسب رأي المقتدي أم حسب رأي الإمام? Is the consideration that the prayer of the Imam be valid according to the judgment of, according to the madhab of the follower, or according to the Imam's own madhab? And that's an important issue. There's entire treatises written on that issue. And so we look at that, and then we'll complete the section. I have to stop here. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam.